Hello, everyone. Charles Coleman here, presenting to you another installment of Disagreements with Dave. Of course, that Dave is Dave Hurwitz, who has an excellent YouTube channel here entitled The Ultimate Classical Musical Guide with Dave Hurwitz. Of course, Hurwitz is a renowned music critic who has well over, I think he's got like 4,000 or so videos here, and I am an avid watcher. Every time I wake up every day, one of my first go-tos is his channel to see what he's posted. He does roughly about 3 videos or so a day, and as I've said many times before, I agree with most of what he likes in terms of recordings in certain pieces or recordings of certain pieces, but there is a small percentage that I disagree with, and I am not the music critic that Dave Hurwitz is, although I've done my share of reviews on various publications, and even though I'm not the critic that he is, I do have something to say nonetheless, and I like to utilize that on my channel. Why? Well, why not? And most of what I disagree with Dave is not so much on recordings as a whole, but certain spots in certain recordings. These are like maybe potentially esoteric kind of things that musicians like Dave and I are really into, but ultimately one has to remember that it's about the recording as a whole as far as any regular listener is concerned, and therefore to make an issue of one spot versus the rest of the recording seems fruitless and not worth it, and therefore I don't like to make presentations about that because of that spot or that spot. One has to look at the recordings as a whole. So generally there's very little I disagree with Dave on, but here's one that I do disagree with him on. The Planets by Gustav Holst, as interpreted by Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic. I like this recording very much. I grew up with it. It's one of the first recordings I ever heard of this epic work by Gustav Holst. Of course, Holst wrote a bunch of other pieces, but for the layman listeners, he's only known for this one. And this recording, I think, is an excellent recording, especially in this reissue that came out in 2017. It's been, I think, reissued at least 5 times, but this most recent reissue is definitely the best one. You know, we talk about how they reissue things and they say that it's digitally remastered more and more. Usually it's subtle, but in this recording, it's not so subtle. It sounds to me what they do is they made it generally louder and probably took the loud sonics and the softer sonics, put them together a little bit and raised them both up in a kind of effective repression sort of way. Of course, this recording was made in the days back when the New York Philharmonic home was Avery Fisher Hall, back when it didn't sound so great, as opposed to Geffen Hall today, where it sounds so much better, albeit $400 million later in renovations. Nonetheless, they did a very good job with the sound on this one. There's some minute details. There's some good things and some not so good things, but I think on the whole, it's a really good recording. Some odd things though, like you notice that the Celeste sounds an octave lower than it's supposed to be. When you write for Celeste, it's supposed to sound an octave higher than written. Well, for some reason, in this recording, the Celeste part is at written pitch. As far as I know, there's no other recording that does it that way. And I'm not sure whether that was intentional or whether that was a mistake, but it's an odd thing to hear, especially if you know this piece very well. I like the recording nonetheless, despite that detail, but there's that. Also, one thing that's interesting is that the harps, both harp 1 and harp 2, which are normally physically together off to the side, in this recording by Bernstein, they are left and right of the stage. I'm sure the 2 harpists didn't like that because in a lot of music, the 2 harps work together, especially in this piece as well. And I got to admit, it's sonically very effective. Is this the best recording of the Planets? No. It's a very good one, but when you consider guys like Charles Dutoit in the Montreal Symphony, James Levine in the Chicago Symphony, Eugene Ormandy, Andrew Litton, Charles Mackerras in the Royal Liverpool, those are all arguably better. but this Bernstein is certainly for me in the top 10, and I will talk about it accordingly. It's funny, when Dave reviewed this recording by Bernstein in his video about the recordings of Holst the Planets, Dave said that this recording was lacking in charisma and conviction. Ooh, I'm not sure I agree with that. Well, I'll point that as we go along. Starting with the first movement, Mars, the Bringer of War, which I think is well performed in this recording. It's funny, the tempo is marked allegro, but there's no metronome marking. So it's like, what kind of an allegro? I like it when it goes very fast. Ba-da-da-dum, dum, 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 ba-da-ba-dum, bum, 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 which is what Bernstein does, and all the other recordings that I mentioned do as well. Very spirited performance here. Especially, I love the spot. I mean, I was talking earlier about indicating little spots here and there. There's one spot right before the cuts when the tempo goes twice as slow. There's this build of the strings go, and you hear the horns blare out this chord, which is supposed to be fortissimo. A lot of conductors like to do a decrescendo and crescendo on that chord, either because it builds tension or you want to hear the string figures going all over the place there. It's not necessary. Holst made it simply fortissimo, no more, no less, leave it alone, and that's what Bernstein does. So that's one nitpicking spot, but nonetheless, I don't like it when you decrescendo and crescendo on that, and it should just be blaring, period. And overall, dedicated performance to the end, powerful ending. What can you say? Good movement. Next movement, the Venus, Bringer of Love. Wow, beautifully done. It's on the slow side, but it doesn't drag. And it's a little self-indulgent in spots, but it's so beautifully done. I think Bernstein handled self-indulgence better than most other conductors. I mean, Lorenz Mazel was very self-indulgent and for the most part didn't always work, because I think Leonard Bernstein was concerned about the overall arch of a piece, regardless of that spot that he liked so much. It's funny, if you ever watched the documentary of The Art of Conducting, where Bernstein is talked about, the violinist Isaac Stern mentioned that Bernstein would overgill the lily once in a while, but so wonderfully. Well, that's especially the case here in this Venus movement of Holst the Planets. Then we get to the Mercury, the Winged Messenger movement. Very quick, maybe a little too quick, because unfortunately they're not always together in some of these 16-note, not always together. A little bit rough and ready in spots, especially in that movement. But generally a well-spirited performance, just not the best performance of that movement. And now we get to Jupiter. Oh my goodness, definitely one of the better performances of this movement, even though in the very beginning it's supposed to be sempre staccato according to the score. Bernstein has the strings do more of a I don't agree with that, and some other conductors like to do that too, but it's still effective. And of course, when we get to the big tune, the famous tune of the whole piece, do 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 do. You know that tune. This is beautifully played by the orchestra here. Spirited, absolutely charismatic in conviction, contrary to what Dave thinks about it. It is a well-spirited performance with a solid punch ending, really effective. Then we get to the Saturn movement. Very dark, very affecting. A little on the slow side. Sometimes when we get to the big climax and it goes in between the fast tempo and slow tempo. Fast tempo, you'd think that it wasn't together, but I checked with the score and it's generally together, but it's really quick. And it's a little hard to tell. I like the way the bell sounds. Ding, 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 ding. It's like he's using a metal striker on that, or some kind of particular metal stick on it. Sounds very piercing, and it works very well. And then after that climax, when it subsides and we hear that string chord, the two harps, again, as I said, on the left and right sides of the stage, how they work off each other sounds really beautiful and very effective. It works when they're closer together. Perhaps Holst wanted it to sound like one harp, but nonetheless, it was very effective to hear them left and right, and it goes to a very ethereal climax that ends the movement. And then we get to Uranus the Magician. Very quick, a little too quick in spots. Unfortunately, there are spots where they're not always perfect. There's a little spot between the tenor tuba and the bass tuba where you hear them go. They're not, some of them fall out, but generally a well-spirited performance, even though it's not very perfect. Keep in mind that there are some overblown moments here, very subliminal, because you can't help but be affected by the performance as a whole. It's a very dedicated performance as far as I'm concerned. Even if it's not perfect, you can't help but be overwhelmed by the spirit of the whole thing. Like the Jupiter movement and like this Uranus movement, a little quicker than usual. Personally, if I were fortunate enough to ever conduct this work, I'd make it a little slower, just a tad. Also, one of my problems with the Uranus movement are with regard to the two timpanists. They play it well, of course, but, you know, they don't really dig into it. And then we have this like battle when they're kind of battling each other in the middle before the before that there's this to me it's now granted Holst marked it as forte, and Bernstein plays it that way accordingly, but to me it should blast. And you should listen to the recording by Ormady and see how I think that should be done, where the two timpanists battle each other, and it's a much more, to me, dedicated performance to that than this one here. But these are minute details, at least as far as I can tell. Otherwise, it's generally performed well. And then we get to Neptune the Mystic. This performance of that is really well done, even if it's on the slow side. I mean, it's slow to begin with, but Bernstein chooses not to go to the faster tempo of allegretto the moment before the chorus comes in. He keeps it at the slow tempo. I don't know if I would want to conduct it that way, but I gotta admit it's very effective. And when the chorus comes in, it sounds so beautiful, very... No, it's cliche to say that it's outer space, ethereal, but that's exactly what it is. It doesn't even sound like a voice. It sounds like when you hear the chorus sing that high G sustained, it sounds like an ethereal instrument that had never been created in humanity or on Earth. It's just an outer worldly sound, which is what Holst was going for, and it's arguably the best recorded section of that. And while that's going on, you hear the bass flute play this lovely two-note motive. Boo-doo, doo-doo. Now, granted, Holst doesn't put any particular dynamic other than it being played softly. Bernstein puts a little accent on the first note and it diminues on to the second note, giving it more of a presence. Boo-doo, whoo-doo. It sounds so effective. I've never heard it done that way in any other version of it. Granted, maybe it's more maybe intended to be more background, but it's very effective here in this recording. Overall, I like this Neptune movement very much. A couple little mistakes here and there. Sometimes there's a moment where the cellos are sustaining a low G sharp and some of them forget to go up to the A above after sustaining. You don't notice it as much because everything else is really effective here. And then, of course, it ends beautifully as the chorus dies away. And it's just overall affecting ending to a very good recording, which I like very much. So that concludes one of my disagreements with Dave. Will I do more of this? Not sure. There isn't much I disagree with him on. Again, most of my disagreements are minute and concern small sections in recordings, not so much the recordings as a whole. And, you know, as Duke Ellington said, if it sounds good, it is good. Until next time.